Why do we pay taxes? I know the answer is obvious, but really think about it. The process and how it all works isn't so simple. This is our segment, The Why in Your Wallet, where we make sense of topics that can cause financial headaches. Federal income taxes were due months ago, which means by now the IRS has either paid you or asked you to pay. Yet experts tell reporter Stassi Olmos you may want to watch the mail. She explains why from Tampa, Florida.
Last year, the American Rescue Plan brought some financial relief to those struggling during the pandemic. It gave tax breaks to those paying student loans, reduced taxable income and wages for low-income earners, increased the child tax credit, paying it out earlier, and some even got a third stimulus check. But because of all of these changes, it made filing taxes a lot more complicated. So people may be finding out right now that they actually owe more money.
They will find you. They will find your assets. They will find your accounts, your savings accounts, your checking accounts, even your income, and they will levy and lien that, and they will get their money. They're very good at it.
Mark Stieber is the Chief Tax Information Officer at Jackson Hewitt, which has about 6,000 offices across the country during tax season.
There's been a lot of publicity recently in the last couple of years since the pandemic, how the IRS is kind of throttling back on audits and on IRS notices.
Stieber says that's still true, but not for what's called a CP-14, notice of balance due for unpaid taxes.
They're not an audit notice. They're not an assessment. They are simply the fact that you had income, you owe tax, and on our system, you don't show that all your taxes were paid in. So by law, in 60 days, they have to let you know.
Millions of these notices are going out right now. Stieber says once received, the clock is ticking with about 3 weeks to respond.
But your first step doesn't necessarily mean just start writing a check and send that money to the IRS.
Stieber says it could be something like leaving information such as a side job, W-2 out, and you may not actually owe money. I did some digging and turns out more and more people are filing their taxes themselves online, which can easily lead to errors. This chart from eFiles shows the increase in electronic filings over the years from about 80% in 2012 to 95% in 2021. Stieber says you can ask for forgiveness on some penalties, so it's important to contact the IRS office immediately.
It adds up very quickly. I've seen many cases over my career where the penalties and interest and cost to fix it is much more than the taxes would have been if you just paid it up front, and you do owe it.
Interest is currently 4% per year accruing daily, but the penalties can be painful, including 25% failure to pay, 25% underpayment, and 25% failure to file.
You should not ignore it, and you should understand it, and you should have someone who's trained and experienced explain it to you if you're not comfortable yourself.
In Tampa Bay, I'm in-depth reporter Stassi Olmos.
Our thanks to Stassi. So be sure to be on the lookout. Now we want to go deeper into how taxes work in the first place. To do that, we bring in Poppy MacDonald. She's the president of USAFacts, which is a not-for-profit and nonpartisan civic initiative aimed at making it easy to access and understand government data. Poppy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You know, the law is the law. Taxes are unavoidable. But what do you think is the biggest misconception about why we pay taxes?
I think potentially the biggest misconception is that we pay it for government services. That is true for the most part. Most of what we pay does go to government services. Taxes are also used to provide incentives for certain behaviors that we want citizens to have. Let me start with, first of all, why we pay the taxes. What is that for? Well, our federal income tax provides about 50% of all funding for federal revenue. If you go to USAFacts.org, you can see a breakdown of what are the sources of federal revenue. In 2021, it was $4.1 trillion, and $2 trillion of that came from our taxpayer income tax revenue. And what are the big things that we cover? About 86% of all that revenue goes to cover just 8 areas. So it covers things like major government programs, Social Security, aid to the disadvantaged like welfare, food stamps, and Medicaid, education, national defense and support to veterans, Medicare, and interest on the debt are the biggest programs that pays for.
Well, and as you walk through that, I was going to ask how crucial is having that funding to keep everything that you just listed running?
It is incredibly crucial. Without 50% of that revenue, I mean, our government system would collapse. We wouldn't be able to do things like fund support for crime and disaster, or for Medicare, or to take care of Social Security to support our senior citizens. So it is 50% of that revenue, and our government would have a really hard time operating and providing those crucial services without it.
What about state governments, in particular, where do they decide that the funds go?
Yes, so state governors typically are responsible for setting the budget, and then the legislature approves that or not. But actually 33% of that money that we pay to the federal government in income tax goes back to the states. And then states, it's actually even a smaller pool of things that are covered by that revenue. So 81% of state revenue covers just 5 crucial programs in our states. And that looks like 32% to education, medical assistance to the poor, government employee retirement, law enforcement, corrections, a big chunk there, and transportation. So really just 5 major programs that states use those taxpayer dollars to fund.
In 2018, really, that was the last time we saw major changes to the federal tax code. President Donald Trump had signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into law. Has it changed things? And if so, how?
It was a big change. It was the biggest or the largest tax law change since 1986. For individuals, that's probably where you saw the biggest change. It increased the standard individual tax deduction, that nearly doubled. It also increased the child tax credit from $1,000 per child to $2,000 per child. So again, that also doubled. And it allowed higher income families to also claim that credit. It also capped at $10,000 the state and local tax deduction that someone can take from what they owe the federal government. And then for businesses, the most significant change, I would say, was a reduction in the corporate income tax rate. That went from 35% to 21%.
Wow. Well, we want to pull up data that you have on your website from the IRS showing the standard deduction for a married household was nearly $25,000 in 2020. It was half of that in 2017. I mean, what has driven that jump?
So that was that same Tax Cuts and Job Act. That changed it pretty significantly in terms of the deduction for married households. It took it from $12,700 before that law to up to $24,000 for joint returns. So that's where you see that impact.
Got it. All right. We had that example there so we can really pair it well and see how much of an impact it made. Poppy MacDonald, we appreciate you joining us on The Why and providing some clarity over something that for many people is not so clear. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.